You stand in the middle of a vast, frozen prairie. The year is 1880. The sun has dipped below the horizon, and the temperature is falling fast. You can hear the wind whistling through the tiny gaps in the heavy log walls of your cabin. Your breath comes in white clouds, and your fingers ache as you pull a scratchy wool blanket tighter around your shoulders. Outside, the world is a dangerous expanse of deep snow and lethal ice. Inside, your entire life is centered around a single glowing hearth. This is not just a home. It is a small fortress against the killing frost. If that fire goes out, the cold will move in like a silent predator. You are about to learn exactly how your ancestors held back the dark and stayed alive during the most brutal winters in history. Welcome to the frozen frontier. You stand on the edge of a vast, golden prairie, or perhaps beneath the towering canopy of an ancient hardwood forest. It is late October, and the world is holding its breath. The high, frantic chirping of the cicadas that defined your summer has faded into a heavy, expectant silence. You wipe the sweat from your brow, but the moisture does not linger as it did in August. Instead, the air feels thin, sharp, and hungry. It dries your skin instantly. You look toward the northern horizon where the sky has taken on a peculiar, bruised shade of violet. You know that look. It is not just a change in the weather. It is an ultimatum. To a frontier family in the 1800s, the changing of the leaves was not a scenic backdrop for a Sunday stroll. It was the sounding of a battle horn. You do not just live in this landscape. You are in a race against it. Every drop of sweat you shed now is a payment against the debt of January. You look at your cabin, a small, humble fortress of hand-hewn logs and mud, and you realize that the walls are thinner than they appeared in the warmth of June. The gaps between the timber seem to grow wider as you watch them, like mouths waiting to swallow the warmth you have yet to build. You begin to notice the signs. It starts with the birds. You see them gathering in the hundreds on the skeletal branches of the oaks. Their chatter nervous and hurried. They are leaving. They have an escape route, a map written in their blood that points toward the heat. You do not have that luxury. Your map ends at the four walls of your home and the boundary of your clearing. You watch a wedge of geese cut across the darkening sky, their haunting cries echoing like a warning. They are the heralds of the siege. Then you look down at the ground. The squirrels are no longer playing. They are working with a frantic, desperate energy, their cheeks bulging with acorns and walnuts. You see the deer, their coats shifting from the light red of summer to a thick, dull gray. The fur is becoming hollow and dense, a natural insulation that you envy. Even the horses in the lean-to are growing shaggy, their manes tangling in the wind. Nature is armoring itself, and you must do the same. You walk toward the woodpile. This is the heart of your survival. In the summer, the pile seemed massive, a monument to your labor with the axe and the saw. But now, as the shadows lengthen, it looks pitifully small. You do not think of wood in terms of cords or stacks. You think of it in terms of hours of life. Every log is a few more minutes of sleep when the mercury drops below zero. You pick up the heavy splitting maul, your palms already calloused and hard. You swing. The crack of the wood splitting open rings out through the quiet woods, a rhythmic, lonely sound. You will swing that maul until your shoulders scream and your vision blurs, because you know that a winter on the frontier is a hungry beast that eats wood faster than any man can cut it. You move to the cabin walls. This is where the real defense begins. You take a bucket of wet clay, lime, and grass, mixed with horsehair if you have it. This is the daubing. You run your fingers along the cracks between the logs, feeling the faint, ghostly draft of the northern wind already trying to push its way inside. You press the mud into the gaps, smoothing it with a flat stone or your bare hands. It is cold and gritty against your skin. You are sealing the hull of your ship before the storm hits. If you miss a single spot, the wind will find it. That tiny hole will become a needle of ice that can freeze a bucket of water on the hearth in the middle of the night. You work until the sun dips below the trees, your fingers numb and stained with the earth. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere has changed. Your wife is no longer focused on the garden or the fresh greens of the meadow. Her world has shrunk to the cellar and the smokehouse. You go down into the root cellar, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and aging vegetation. This is your treasury. Row upon row of potatoes, carrots, and turnips are buried in boxes of dry sand to keep them from shriveling. There are jars of pickled beets and salted cabbage. This is not just food. These are the bricks of your survival. You count them again and again, doing the grim math of the winter. How many potatoes per person per day? How long until the first thaw? You look at the salted pork hanging from the rafters of the smokehouse, the thick, smoky scent of hickory and salt acting as a promise of protein during the months when the forest goes silent. The sun sets earlier now, a fiery orange that provides no warmth. You sit on the porch for a moment, listening to the world settle. The wind has shifted. It is coming from the northwest now, carrying the scent of pine and something else. Something clean, sharp, and utterly devoid of life. It is the scent of the high mountains and the frozen plains of the north. It is the smell of the coming ice. You remember what the older settlers told you. They spoke of the year the birds froze in mid-air and fell like stones from the sky. They spoke of the year the sap in the trees froze so quickly that the trunks exploded with a sound like cannon fire. You look at your small clearing and feel the immense weight of the wilderness. Out here, there is no one to call for help. There are no paved roads, no stores, and no warmth other than what you have created with your own two hands. You are a small spark of heat in a vast, encroaching darkness. Then comes the night it finally happens. You go to bed under a mountain of heavy wool blankets and tanned buffalo hides. The weight is comforting, pressing you into the mattress of dried corn husks. You listen to the fire crackling in the hearth, but even with the flames dancing, the edges of the room are cold. You fall into a light, uneasy sleep, the kind of sleep a soldier has before a battle. You wake up before the sun. The air inside the cabin is so cold it hurts to breathe. Every inhalation is a sharp prick in your lungs. You look toward the small, grease paper window, and you see it. It is not white, but a translucent, ghostly gray. You climb out of bed, your feet flinching as they touch the frozen floorboards. You walk to the door and push it open. It resists for a moment, the wood groaning against the frost that has fused the latch. You step outside, and the world has been transformed. The vibrant oranges and browns of yesterday are gone, replaced by a crystalline silver. Every blade of grass is encased in a delicate, jagged armor of ice. The woodpile is dusted with a fine white powder that sparkles like diamonds in the dim, pre-dawn light. The water in the trough is a solid, unyielding block. This is the first frost. It is beautiful, but it is a lethal beauty. It is the sign that the door has been locked behind you. The growing season is officially dead. The siege has begun. You look at the breath blooming in front of your face like a white cloud, and you realize that from this moment on, your life is a calculation of calories and BTUs. The luxury of the summer is over. You pick up the axe, the metal so cold it feels like it might stick to your skin, and you head for the woodpile. The first frost is not just a change in the weather. It is the moment you realize that the frontier is no longer your home. It is your opponent, and the contest will last until the first green bud of spring, months of darkness and wind away. You take a deep breath, the frozen air stinging your throat, and you get to work. There is no time to waste. The cold is here, and it does not intend to leave until it has taken everything you have. This is the reality of the frontier. This is the beginning of the long quiet. You stand on the edge of the great American prairie, and the first thing you notice is the wind. It is a constant, physical presence that never seems to rest. In the summer, it carries the scent of dry grass and dust. But as the seasons turn, that wind transforms into a serrated blade of ice. You look around and see nothing but a rolling sea of brown and gold. There are no forests here to block the gale. There are no hills high enough to offer shelter. If you are going to survive the months of white darkness ahead, you cannot fight the landscape. You have to become part of it. You grip the handles of a breaking plow, the heavy iron blade designed specifically to slice through the dense, ancient network of roots that hold this earth together. This is the birth of your winter fortress. You are not building with stone or brick. You are building with the very skin of the earth. You watch as the plow turns over long, dark ribbons of prairie grass. The roots are so thick and interconnected that the soil does not crumble. It comes up in solid, heavy strips that you carefully cut into blocks with a sharp spade. To the people around you, this is known as Nebraska marble. To you, it is your only hope for warmth. You begin to stack these bricks of sod, 2 feet wide and 4 inches thick, laying them with the grass side down. You work quickly because you can feel the air growing thinner and sharper every afternoon. You are building walls that are 3 feet thick at the base. You are not just building a house. You are building a living thermal battery. These walls will soak up the heat of your small stove and hold it, radiating it back into the room long after the fire has died down to embers. As you lift another heavy block into place, you smell the damp, rich scent of decaying vegetation and moist clay. It is the smell of the underworld. Your hands are stained deep black and your fingernails are caked with grit. But as the walls rise, the wind begins to lose its teeth. You step inside the unfinished perimeter and the silence is immediate. The thick earth swallows the sound of the world. Outside, the grass may be whipping in a gale, but inside, the air is still and heavy. Now you look up. The roof is your greatest challenge and your greatest danger. Without trees, you have to find a few precious rafters of cedar or willow to stretch across the top. Over these, you lay more sod, grass side up this time. You are effectively living in a cave that sits above the ground. You know the weight is immense. You know that if the rains come before the freeze, the roof could become a slurry of mud that might collapse and bury you in your sleep. But for now, that weight is your friend. Presses down, sealing the gaps and making the structure airtight. If you had been lucky enough to settle further north or east, where the great pines and hardwoods grow, your fortress would look very different. Imagine yourself now in the deep timber of the North Woods. Here, the challenge is not a lack of material, but the sheer physical labor of taming the forest. You stand before a massive white pine, your breath blooming in a thick cloud of white before your face. The axe in your hand feels heavy, the steel cold enough to burn your skin if you touched it with a bare palm. You spend weeks felling trees, trimming the branches, and dragging the heavy trunks through the undergrowth. You are not just building for walls. You are engaging in a feat of precision engineering. You use a broadaxe to square the sides of the logs, a process that requires a steady hand and a keen eye. You notch the ends, carving out the wood so that each log fits into the one below it. You might use a saddle notch or a more complex dovetail, but the goal is the same. You want the logs to lock together so tightly that a knife blade cannot pass between them. But even the best notches leave gaps. You look at the skeleton of your cabin and see the slivers of daylight peering through the horizontal seams. This is where the winter kills. If you leave those gaps open, the wind will whistle through and steal your body heat in minutes. You begin the process of chinking and daubing. You gather everything the forest and the clearing provide. You find dry moss, scraps of wood, and handfuls of straw. You wedge these into the cracks, packing them tight with a wooden mallet. Then comes the daubing. You mix a thick paste of clay, sand, and lime if you can find it. If you cannot, you use animal hair or even dried cow manure to give the mixture strength. You smear this heavy plaster over the chinking, smoothing it with your hands until the walls are sealed. As you work, you realize that your fortress is a living thing. The wood will shrink and swell. The earth will settle. You will have to return to these seams every autumn, patching the cracks that have opened up over the summer. You are in a constant dialogue with your shelter, a never-ending negotiation for your life. You step inside your finished cabin and look at the floor. If you are fortunate, you have puncheon floors made of split logs, smooth side up. More likely, you have packed earth. You have spent hours sprinkling water on the dirt and tamping it down until it is as hard as concrete. You might even have poured ox blood over it to create a hard, dark crust that resists dust and moisture. The windows are small, barely more than slits. Glass is a luxury you cannot afford and a vulnerability you cannot permit. Every square inch of glass is a place where heat escapes. Instead, you have stretched translucent animal parchment or greased paper across the openings. It lets in a dim, amber light, but it keeps the biting air at bay. You look through the paper and see only the blurred shadows of the trees outside. You are cut off from the world, but you are safe. You turn your attention to the exterior. The walls are not enough. As the first true blizzard approaches, you begin the process of banking. You take your shovel and pile mounds of earth against the outside of the cabin, sloping it up toward the windows. When the snow begins to fall, you do not clear it away from the walls. You encourage it. You bank the snow high, packing it down until it reaches the eaves. You understand something that the modern world has forgotten. Snow is not just cold. Snow is an insulator. Trapped within those frozen flakes is a vast amount of air. By burying your home in the drifts, you are wrapping it in a thick white blanket. The temperature of the air outside might drop to 30 degrees below zero, but against your logs, protected by the snow, it stays much warmer. You are literally huddling inside the heart of the winter. You look at your door. It is thick, made of heavy planks of oak, and it is the only way in or out. You have hung a heavy quilt or a buffalo robe over the inside of the doorway. Every time you enter or exit, you move quickly, sliding behind the fabric to ensure that as little of your precious warmth as possible escapes into the void. You stand in the center of your room. The space is tiny, perhaps no more than 12 feet by 14 feet. You can reach out and touch the ceiling. In the summer, this smallness felt suffocating. But now, as you hear the first howl of a gale beginning to rise in the chimney, the smallness feels like a hug. You have engineered a space that your own body heat can help warm. You have built a fortress of sod and timber that stands as a defiance against the physics of the cold. You feel the weight of the logs and the density of the earth surrounding you. You hear the wood groan as it settles under the weight of the mounting snow on the roof. You are no longer a victim of the prairie or the forest. You are a tenant of the earth itself, tucked away in a burrow of your own making. You sit down near the hearth and listen to the silence of the walls. They are thick, they are heavy, and for the next 5 months, they are the only thing standing between you and the end of your story. You have built your fortress. Now you must learn how to live within it. You stand in the center of your newly raised cabin. To an outsider, it might look like a fortress of solid oak and pine. But to you, standing in the dim light of a late autumn afternoon, it looks like a sieve. You look at the walls and you do not see just the logs. You see the spaces between them. No matter how skilled you were with the broadaxe, no matter how carefully you notched the corners to fit together like the fingers of 2 locking hands, the wood is an organic, changing thing. As the green timber dries, it shrinks, it twists, it checks. Every log bows away from its neighbor, leaving long, horizontal gashes that reveal the gray sky outside. The wind does not just blow against your house. It hunts for these gaps. You can hear it now, a low, mournful whistle as the breeze finds a crack no wider than a knife blade. It reaches inside and pulls the warmth right out of the room. In the summer, these cracks were a blessing, providing a much-needed cross breeze and a way for the smoke of the cook fire to escape. But now the air has turned brittle. The first frost has already crunched under your boots this morning, and you know that if you do not seal these gaps, the cabin will be nothing more than a wooden cage for the winter cold. This is the moment you begin the tedious, back-breaking, and absolutely essential task of chinking and daubing. To understand the gravity of this work, you have to realize that you are not just plugging holes. You are creating an airtight seal that must endure the most violent temperature swings imaginable. You begin by gathering your materials, and on the frontier you use what the land provides. You look to the creek bed for clay and fine sand. You look to the barn floor for dried grass, straw, or even the hair from your livestock that was shed during the spring. If you were lucky enough to have access to a limestone outcropping, you might have spent days burning the rock in a kiln to create lime, which acts as a powerful binder and an antibacterial agent. You start with the chinking. Think of this as the skeleton of your seal. You cannot simply slap mud into a 3-inch gap and expect it to stay. It would sag, crack, and fall out before the sun set. Instead, you need a physical filler. You pick up a handful of cedar shakes, or perhaps thin, wedge-shaped pieces of scrap wood left over from when you squared the logs. You kneel by the bottom course of logs and begin to jam these wedges into the gaps. You hammer them in firmly but carefully. You are creating a bridge between the upper log and the lower log. This wooden filler provides a surface for your mortar to cling to. In some places, where the gaps are narrow, you might use bundles of dried moss or even river stones. Every inch of the wall must be filled. Your fingers grow raw from the rough bark and the splinters, but you cannot stop. Every gap you overlook is an invitation for the frost to enter. Once the wooden chinking is in place, you move on to the daubing. This is the flesh on the bones. You have a large wooden trough or perhaps an old hide spread out on the ground. Into this, you dump your clay, your sand, and your water. You step into the mixture with your bare feet or heavy boots, treading the cold, heavy muck until it reaches the consistency of thick dough. You add the binder now. You throw in handfuls of chopped straw or hog hair. These fibers act like the rebar in modern concrete, giving the mud tensile strength so it will not crumble when it dries. You scoop up a heavy trowel full of the mixture, or more likely you use your bare hands. You press the wet daubing into the gaps, smoothing it over the wooden chinks. You start from the bottom and work your way up. It is a messy, rhythmic process. Press, smear, smooth. Press, smear, smooth. You have to work quickly. If the mixture dries too fast, it will pull away from the wood. If it is too wet, it will slide down the wall in a muddy heap. You learn to feel the right consistency through your palms. You are looking for a seal that is flush with the outer curve of the logs, shaped so that rainwater will shed away from the seam rather than pooling inside and rotting the timber. As you work, you think about the physics of the wall. The logs will continue to move. When the deep freeze hits, the wood will contract. In the spring thaw, it will expand. Your daubing must be flexible enough to survive this movement, yet hard enough to stop a gale. You realize that your cabin is a living thing, and this mud and hair mixture is the skin that keeps its blood warm. The sun begins to dip below the tree line, and the temperature drops instantly. Your hands are coated in a layer of freezing mud that has begun to pull the moisture from your skin, leaving your knuckles cracked and bleeding. But you look at the section of the wall you have finished. The jagged lines of light from the outside are gone. The wall looks solid now, a continuous barrier of golden wood and gray-brown earth. You move inside to do the same to the interior walls. A well-built cabin is daubed on both the outside and the inside, creating a dead airspace between the two layers of mud. This is your insulation. It is the same principle as a modern double-pane window. That pocket of air, trapped between the outer daubing and the inner daubing, is what will keep the heat of your fireplace from escaping into the night. By the time you reach the upper logs near the loft, you are working by the flickering light of a tallow candle. Your shoulders ache from reaching overhead, and your legs are stiff from kneeling on the dirt floor. But there is a psychological shift happening as you work. The cabin feels different now. The hollow, echoing sound of the wind has been replaced by a muffled silence. The air inside feels heavy, still, and expectant. You have created a vacuum of sorts, a protected space where you can finally control the environment. You think about the families who came before you and those who will come after. You think about the different recipes for daubing used across the frontier. In the south, they might use more red clay and pine needles. In the north, they might rely on heavy lime and sand to create a white finish that reflects the light of the fire, making the small room feel brighter during the long, dark months of January. Some families even mix in a bit of salt to help the mud retain just enough moisture so it does not become brittle and turn to dust in the dry winter air. The work is never truly finished. Every year in the late autumn, you will have to walk around the cabin and inspect your handiwork. You will find places where the logs have shifted and the daubing has fallen out. You will find holes where curious squirrels or hungry insects have picked away at the straw. This annual ritual of chinking and daubing is the price of admission for living in the wilderness. It is a humble task, devoid of the glory of the hunt or the excitement of the trail, but it is the most important labor you will perform all year. Finally, you wipe the last of the mud from your hands and stand back. The cabin is sealed. You can no longer see the stars through the cracks in your walls. You go to the hearth and kindle a small fire. Usually, the heat would be sucked out through a dozen different openings, leaving you shivering even as your face burned from the flames. But tonight, for the first time, the heat stays. It fills the room, pushing back the shadows, warming the very logs you have just sealed. You realize that you have transitioned from merely occupying a structure to truly inhabiting a home. The wind outside howls, frustrated, unable to find a way in. You have won this round against the elements. You have turned a pile of trees and mud into a fortress of warmth. The silence of the room is your reward, a deep, heavy quiet that promises a night of sleep without the bite of the frost on your blankets. You are no longer at the mercy of the drafts. You are protected. You are home. You stand in the center of your small cabin, and the first thing you notice is that your breath is still visible in the dim light. Even with the door shut and the heavy latches thrown, the cold is a physical presence. It is a weight that pushes against the walls, seeking out every microscopic gap between the logs. To survive here, you cannot merely exist. You must engage in a constant, rhythmic battle to maintain the one thing that stands between your family and the grave. That thing is the fire. The fireplace is the heart of your home, but it is a heart with a terrifyingly high metabolism. It is a hungry, demanding beast that never sleeps and never feels satisfied. To understand the sheer scale of the task ahead of you, you have to look beyond the flickering flames and out toward the dark, snow-covered tree line. On the American frontier, your life is measured in cords of wood. A cord is a stack of firewood 4 feet high, 4 feet wide, and 8 feet long. To survive a single winter in the Northern Territories, your family might need 20, 30, or even 40 of these massive stacks. Think about that for a moment. Every single piece of that would had to be identified while it was still standing as a living tree. It had to be felled with a heavy iron axe or a 2-man crosscut saw. It had to be limbed, bucked into manageable rounds, hauled through the mud or snow by oxen or by your own straining back, and then split into the triangular wedges that fit into your hearth. When you look at your woodpile, you are not just looking at fuel. You are looking at months of backbreaking labor and thousands upon thousands of individual swings of an axe. You step toward the hearth and pick up the iron poker. The wood you burned this afternoon has crumbled into a thick bed of glowing orange coals. This is the foundation of your warmth. You cannot afford to let this bed of coals die out, because starting a fire from scratch in the middle of a sub-zero night is a desperate and difficult task. You reach for a fresh log from the small stack you brought inside at sunset. You feel the rough, frozen bark against your calloused palms. This piece is white oak. You chose it specifically because it is heavy and dense. On the frontier, you quickly learn the language of the forest. Not all wood is created equal, and your survival depends on knowing which tree to harvest for which purpose. You know that softwoods like pine, cedar, and spruce are the great starters. They are full of sticky, flammable resin that catches quickly and burns with a bright, frantic energy. They pop and crackle, throwing sparks into the room, sending a sudden burst of heat into the air. But pine is a short-lived friend. It burns hot and fast, leaving behind nothing but thin gray ash and a cold room within an hour. For the long, dark hours of the night, you need the hardwoods. You need the oak, the hickory, the maple, or the ash. These trees grew slowly in the summer sun, packing their fibers tight and dense. When they burn, they do not flare up and vanish. Instead, they glow with a steady, intense heat that can last for hours. They turn into the coals that will still be humming with warmth when the sun begins to peek over the horizon. But there is a catch. You cannot simply walk out, cut down a fresh oak, and throw it on the fire. You have felt the frustration of trying to burn green wood. You can hear it screaming in the flames, the sap boiling and hissing as it escapes from the ends of the logs. Green wood does not give you heat. It uses all its energy just to evaporate the water trapped inside its cells, filling your cabin with a thick, bitter smoke that stings your eyes and coats your chimney with dangerous, flammable creosote. To stay warm, you have to be a master of logistics. The wood you are burning tonight was likely cut a full year ago. It has been sitting in your woodpile, protected from the rain, drying out until it is light and brittle. The quest for firewood is an infinite cycle that dominates your calendar. In the spring, when the sap begins to rise, you are already thinking about next winter. In the heat of the summer, when the mosquitoes are thick enough to choke on, you are in the woods with your axe. You are dripping with sweat, your muscles screaming as you swing and pull, because you know that every hour of work in the sun is an hour of life in the February frost. You watch your woodpile grow with the same intensity that a banker watches their gold. A large, well-stacked woodpile is the ultimate status symbol on the frontier. It tells every passerby that you are a person of foresight, that your family is safe, and that you have conquered the basic requirement of survival. You place the heavy oak log onto the coals. You watch as the heat begins to lick at the dry bark. There is a specific smell to it, a rich, earthy aroma that signals the beginning of a long burn. You use the poker to settle the log firmly into the ash. This is the nightly ritual of banking the fire. You are not trying to create a roaring blaze right now. A roaring fire is for cooking or for warming up after a long day in the fields. At night, a roaring fire is a waste of resources. It would burn through your supply too quickly and might even overheat the chimney to the point of a house fire. Instead, you carefully arrange the logs and then use the iron shovel to heap the gray wood ash over the glowing embers. By burying the fire in its own remains, you are insulating it. You are cutting off just enough oxygen to keep it from burning out, but leaving enough for it to smolder. This is the art of the hearth. You are putting the fire to sleep, just as you are putting your family to bed. Underneath that blanket of ash, the coals will stay alive, pulsing with a low, secret heat. You look at your hands in the firelight. They are rough, scarred by splinters and blackened by soot. The skin is cracked from the dry heat of the room and the biting cold of the outdoors. Every person in your family shares this burden. Your children spend their days gathering kindling, the small twigs and dried leaves that act as the fire's tinder. They hunt for wood chips left behind by your axe, knowing that even a handful of cedar shavings is precious. There is no such thing as a small piece of wood in a frontier winter. Everything that can burn is a treasure. The silence of the cabin is broken only by the occasional settling of the logs and the distant, rhythmic howling of the wind outside. You realize that your entire existence is tethered to this pile of burning carbon. If you ran out of wood, your cabin would become a tomb within 24 hours. The water in your bucket would freeze solid. Your breath would turn to ice on your blankets. The very walls would begin to shrink and crack in the cold. This is why the quest for firewood is infinite. It is a task that is never truly finished. Even as you stand here watching this log catch the flame, you are mentally calculating how many more logs are left in the shed. You are wondering if the snow will get too deep to reach the back of the woodpile. You are thinking about the dead standing timber on the north ridge that you need to fell once the crust of the snow is hard enough to walk on. You take one last look at the hearth. The oak is holding. The ash is settled. The heat is radiating out in slow, steady waves, warming the floorboards beneath your feet. You have done your duty for another night. You have fed the beast, and in return, it will keep the darkness and the frost at bay. You turn away from the light, moving toward the shadows of the sleeping area, feeling the weight of the day's labor in every joint. The wood is ready. The fire is banked. You lie down, pulling the heavy wool blankets up to your chin. The room is quiet now, and the orange glow on the ceiling begins to dim as the ash does its work. You close your eyes, the smell of the oak smoke lingering in the air like a promise. Tomorrow, as soon as the first gray light touches the frost on the windows, you will rise. You will stir these coals, add the pine kindling, and begin the cycle all over again. The axe is waiting by the door. The forest is waiting beyond the clearing. And as long as you have the strength to swing, the hearth will remain warm. You have traveled for weeks, perhaps months, watching the landscape slowly shed its heavy coat of oak, maple, and pine. As your wagon rolled westward, the shadows grew shorter and the horizon wider. Now you stand in the middle of a vast, undulating sea of grass that stretches toward the edge of the world. There is a profound silence here, broken only by the persistent whistle of the wind. You look around, squinting against the bright sun of the Great Plains, and realization hits you like a physical weight. There are no trees. Not a single sapling breaks the line of the horizon. No thickets of brush hide in the hollows. Just grass. Endless, golden, waving grass. In the timbered lands you left behind, wood was the currency of survival. You understood how to read a forest, how to fell a tree, and how to season a log. But here, on the treeless plain, those skills are suddenly useless. As the first chill of autumn bites into the air, a primal fear begins to stir in your chest. You know the legends of the prairie blizzards, the stories of temperatures dropping so low that a cup of boiling water tossed into the air turns to ice before it hits the ground. You have a stove, a sturdy cast iron beast you hauled across the Missouri River, but it sits cold and hollow in the corner of your sod house. Without wood, how will you feed the fire? How will you keep your children from freezing when the white darkness descends? You look down at your feet and you see it, a gray, dried, circular disc resting among the bunchgrass. To a refined city dweller, it is nothing more than waste, a disgusting byproduct of the cattle drives and buffalo herds. But to you, a homesteader facing a Kansas winter, it is gold. You reach down and pick it up. It is light, brittle, and completely odorless, having been baked by the summer sun until all moisture and offense have vanished. This is a cow chip, or if you are lucky enough to be in buffalo country, a buffalo chip. In the diaries of the women who came before you, they call it prairie coal. You realize that survival on the plains requires a total shift in perspective. You cannot impose your will on this land. You must accept what it offers. Gathering fuel becomes a daily ritual, a chore that consumes hours of your time and defines the rhythm of your family's life. You grab a burlap sack or a wicker basket and head out into the tall grass. You are not looking for timber. You are looking for the meadow's gift. Your children follow behind you, their small hands becoming adept at spotting the right chips. You want the ones that are weathered gray, the ones that crumble slightly at the edges. If they are still green or brown, they are too fresh. They will smolder and hiss and fill your home with a thick, acrid smoke that stings the eyes. But a well-seasoned chip, one that has sat in the sun for months, is a concentrated brick of energy. Imagine the scene as the sun begins to set. You carry your heavy sack back to the soddy, your fingers dusty with the remains of digested grass. You arrange the chips in the belly of your stove. You start the fire with a bit of dry tinder, perhaps a handful of withered grass, and then you layer the chips on top. They catch easily. The flame they produce is not the roaring, snapping orange of an oak log. Instead, it is a steady, blue and yellow glow. It is a quiet fire. There is no popping of sap, no showers of sparks. The heat is surprisingly intense and remarkably consistent. If you close your eyes, you might almost forget what the fuel is. The smell is not of manure, but of a sweet, herbal incense, like the ghost of the summer prairie being released into the room. However, the chips burn fast. A single chip might last only 10 or 15 minutes. To keep a house warm through a freezing night, you need hundreds of them. Your barn or your lean-to becomes a warehouse for thousands of these discs, stacked neatly like cordwood, a literal wall of insulation against the wind. You learn to appreciate the herds that pass through. A passing trail drive is not just a spectacle of dust and lowing cattle. It is a delivery of life-giving fuel. You watch the cows graze with a sense of gratitude, knowing that every blade of grass they consume will eventually be returned to you as a combustible brick. But even the supply of chips can run low, or perhaps you are a farmer who has successfully broken the sod and raised your first crop of corn. As you sit in your kitchen, shelling the ears to make cornmeal for your porridge, you look at the mountain of bare cobs piling up on the table. In the east, these might be thrown to the hogs or used as mulch. On the prairie, they are a precious resource. A corn cob is a marvel of natural engineering. It is porous, light, and packed with fibers that love to burn. You shove a handful of cobs into the stove, and they ignite almost instantly. They provide a fierce, white-hot heat that is perfect for baking bread or searing meat. For a brief moment, the kitchen is as warm as any manor house in Virginia. But like the cow chips, the cobs vanish into ash in a heartbeat. To cook a full meal, you must stand by the stove constantly, feeding it cob after cob, a rhythmic stoking that leaves your hands smelling of toasted grain. You learn the hierarchy of heat. You use the cow chips for the steady, overnight glow that keeps the frost off the blankets, and you save the precious corn cobs for the high heat of the oven and the morning coffee. As the winter deepens and the snow drifts bury your windows, you might find yourself facing the ultimate challenge of the treeless plain. What do you do when the chips are buried under 4 feet of snow and your supply of corn cobs is gone? You look out at the prairie, and you see the grass. Not the short, grazed stubble of the cow paths, but the tall, tough bluestem and switchgrass that grows in the lowlands. This grass is your final line of defense. You spend your autumn days preparing for this. You gather great armfuls of the long grass and you learn the art of making twisted cats. You take a handful of stems and you twist them tightly over and over until the fibers kink and fold back on themselves, creating a dense, rope-like knot. These grass cats are your makeshift logs. If you were to simply throw loose hay into a stove, it would vanish in a flash of yellow light, providing no sustained warmth. But by twisting it into these tight, pressurized bundles, you force the fire to work harder to consume the fuel. You sit by the lamp in the evening, your muscles aching from the repetitive motion, twisting hundreds of these cats. Your fingers become calloused and stained green. It is a tedious, never-ending task. Some of your neighbors might even invest in a specialized invention known as a hay burner stove. This machine is a testament to frontier ingenuity. It features 2 large, vertical cylinders that you pack tightly with hay or grass. You invert these cylinders over the firebox, and as the bottom of the hay column burns, the weight of the fuel above it feeds it slowly into the flames. It is a gravity-fed furnace of grass, a way to automate the struggle for warmth. In the dead of January, when the wind is howling through the chinks in your sod walls and the thermometer has long since given up, you realize that your survival is tied to the very earth beneath you. You are burning the prairie to survive the prairie. There is a strange, beautiful cycle to it. The sun feeds the grass, the buffalo and the cattle eat the grass, the corn draws its life from the soil, and you, the homesteader, harvest the remnants of it all to keep the darkness at bay. You sit in your small, warm room, watching the yellow light flicker against the earthen walls. The smell of burning cobs and dried grass fills the air. It is a humble heat, born of necessity and hard, dirty work. There is no grandeur in a bucket of manure or a pile of twisted weeds. But as you listen to the gale outside, a wind that could strip the skin from your face in minutes, you feel a profound sense of triumph. You have looked at a land that offered no wood, no coal, and no shelter, and you have found a way to thrive. You have turned the waste of the plains into the hearth of a home. You are no longer a stranger in a barren land. You are a part of the prairie, fueled by its past seasons and warmed by its very heart. The treeless plain tried to freeze you out, but with a handful of chips and a pile of cobs, you have built a fortress of warmth that not even the fiercest northward wind can breach. The fire in your hearth is a flickering orange heart, but as the wind howls outside your cabin walls, you realize that the heat of the flames can only travel so far. Radiant heat is a fickle friend. It toasts your face while your back remains chilled by the drafty air creeping through the chinking of the logs. To survive the night, you must build a second, more personal fortress. You must wrap yourself in the geometry of layered insulation. This is not just about grabbing the nearest blanket. On the frontier, staying warm is a science of textures, weights, and the clever trapping of air. You reach for your heavy wool coat, but before you put it on, you consider the layers beneath it. In the 19th century, wool is the undisputed king of survival. You feel the scratchy, oily texture of the fibers against your skin. This is not the soft, processed wool of a modern department store. This is honest, raw material, still smelling faintly of the sheep it came from and the lanolin grease that makes it nearly waterproof. This grease is your first line of defense. Even if the snow manages to blow through a gap in the door and melt on your shoulder, the wool will not collapse. It holds its shape, keeping those tiny pockets of air intact. You understand intuitively what a modern physicist would explain through complex equations. Heat is lost when air moves. To stay warm, you must stop the air from moving. You start with a thin linen or cotton undershirt. This layer is meant to wick away any moisture because on a sub-zero night, sweat is your enemy. If you get too hot while banking the fire and your skin becomes damp, that moisture will eventually turn into a conductive bridge that pulls the heat straight out of your body. You smooth the fabric down, tucking it tightly into your wool trousers. Next comes the heavy wool shirt. It is thick and dense, woven on a hand loom with a tight grain. As you pull it over your head, you feel the immediate change. This is the beginning of the geometry. Each layer of fabric creates a thin, stagnant layer of air between itself and the next. This trapped air is the actual insulator. The wool fibers themselves are just the scaffolding that holds the air in place. You pull on a vest, perhaps made of quilted scrap fabric or a sturdy leather, to keep your core protected. Your torso is the engine room of your body. If you can keep your heart and lungs warm, your body will continue to pump warm blood to your extremities. But the night is deepening, and the temperature in the cabin is dropping fast. You move toward the bed, which is a masterpiece of frontier engineering. You do not just lie down on a mattress. You enter a cocoon. Your mattress or tick is stuffed tight with dried corn husks or straw. It is nearly a foot thick, providing a massive buffer between you and the cold floor or the wooden slats of the bed frame. Beneath you, the straw crunches and shifts, creating even more air pockets that prevent the cold from rising up through the bottom of the bed. Now you reach for the heavy hitters of the frontier winter. You pull back a layer of hand-stitched quilts. These quilts are more than just family heirlooms. They are functional armor. Each one is a sandwich of fabric. The top and bottom are usually heavy cotton or wool scraps, but it is the batting inside that matters. Many of these quilts are stuffed with raw wool or unrolled cotton batting. When you stack 4 or 5 of these quilts on top of one another, the weight is substantial. It feels like a physical pressure on your chest, a heavy, comforting burden that pins you to the mattress. This weight is intentional. It compresses the layers of air, preventing them from circulating and carrying your body heat away into the rafters. But the final layer is the most important. You reach for the buffalo robe. If you are living on the Great Plains or the Northern Territories, this is your prized possession. A single bison hide, cured with the thick, curly winter fur still attached, is heavy enough to make a grown man grunt as he lifts it. You drape it over the very top of the quilts. The leather side is tough and windproof, while the fur side is a chaotic forest of hairs that trap an incredible amount of heat. The fur acts as a thermal break. Any heat that manages to escape the quilts is caught in the dense undercoat of the bison fur. You climb into the bed, and for a moment, the sheets are like ice. You shiver violently, your muscles tensing. But this is part of the process. Your shivering is a mechanical furnace, generating the initial burst of heat needed to prime the system. Within minutes, the space beneath the buffalo robe begins to warm. You are now the heat source for a very small, very efficient room made of fabric and fur. You are likely not sleeping alone. On the frontier, the family bed is a matter of life and death. You slide in next to your spouse, and perhaps 2 children are tucked in at the foot of the bed or squeezed between the adults. The combined body heat of 4 people creates a microclimate that no single person could maintain on their own. You feel the warmth of the person next to you, a literal life support system. The geometry of the blankets is designed to keep this shared heat from escaping through the sides. You tuck the edges of the quilts deep under the mattress, creating a sealed envelope. As you lie there, you think about your feet. They are the hardest part to keep warm. You are wearing thick, hand-knitted wool socks, perhaps even 2 pairs. But even then, the tips of your toes feel like stones. Some families use a heated soapstone or a brick that has been sitting near the hearth all evening. You wrap the hot stone in a piece of old flannel and slide it down to the bottom of the bed. When your feet touch it, the relief is instantaneous. The stone acts as a thermal battery, slowly releasing the energy it absorbed from the fire hours ago. You listen to the sounds of the cabin. The wood of the walls groans and pops as the extreme cold causes the logs to contract. This is the sound of the world outside trying to get in. But inside your cocoon, the air is still. You can feel the breath of your children, steady and rhythmic. You realize that your survival depends entirely on these layers. If you were to sleep under a single thick blanket, the heat would eventually radiate away. But by using many thin layers of wool and cotton, topped with the heavy hide of an animal, you have created a thermal gradient. The layer closest to your skin is nearly 90 degrees, while the outer surface of the buffalo robe might be freezing to the touch. This is the geometry of layered insulation. It is about density and loft. It is about the way a wool fiber scales under a microscope, interlocking with its neighbors to create a mesh that the wind cannot easily penetrate. It is about the way you have learned to dress not for fashion, but for the physics of the frost. Even your head is part of the plan. You pull a knitted wool nightcap down over your ears and brow. You know that a massive amount of heat escapes through the scalp, and in a room where you can see your own breath in the moonlight, exposing your head is a mistake you only make once. The cap completes the seal. You are now entirely encased in your own recycled warmth. The night is long, and the fire in the hearth will eventually die down to a heap of gray ash. The water in the bucket by the door will freeze solid, perhaps even cracking the wood if it is full. The ink in the well on the table will turn to a dark crystal. But inside the geometry of the bed, you are safe. The wool does its silent work. The bison fur holds the line. You drift into a deep sleep, protected by the heavy, scratchy, and wonderful weight of the only things that stand between you and the lethal bite of the frontier winter. You have built a world within a world, and for tonight it is enough. You can feel it now, the way the cold does not just sit on your skin but tries to reach inside you. It is a persistent thief, looking for any way to steal the warmth your heart produces. Outside the cabin, the wind howls through the frozen pines, and the thermometer has likely dropped well below zero. Inside, the fire in the hearth is your primary defense, but you know that a fire in the fireplace is not enough to keep a human being alive for long in these conditions. You need a fire of a different sort. You need a fire that burns in your blood, fueled by the calories you consume. On the frontier, food is not merely nutrition. It is your thermal shield. It is the literal fuel that your body will burn to keep your internal temperature at 98.6 degrees while the world outside is frozen solid. When you sit at your rough-hewn wooden table, you are not looking for a light salad or a delicate pastry. You are looking for mass. You are looking for density. In the depth of a frontier winter, your body becomes a furnace that demands constant stoking. You might find yourself consuming 4,000, 5,000, or even 6,000 calories a day just to maintain your weight. Every movement you make, from hauling buckets of ice to be melted into water to swinging an axe against a frozen log, requires an immense amount of energy. But even when you are sitting perfectly still, your body is working overtime, shivering and metabolic processing just to keep your organs from failing. Think about your breakfast. As the gray light of a winter dawn creeps through the small, thick glass of your window, you reach for the cast iron skillet. You do not reach for lean proteins. You reach for the lard. Lard is the gold of the winter cabin. It is rendered pig fat, white and thick, and it is the most efficient way to pack calories into your system. You drop a generous dollop of it into the pan, watching it melt into a shimmering pool. Into this, you might crumble salt pork or thick slices of bacon. The salt is vital, as it helps your body retain the precious water you need to stay hydrated in the dry winter air. But the fat is the star. You take a heavy wooden spoon and stir in cornmeal or flour to make a thick, heavy gravy. This is not a sauce meant to accent a dish. It is the dish itself. You pour this dense, calorie-laden mixture over sourdough biscuits that have been rising near the warmth of the hearth all night. As you eat, you can almost feel the heat beginning to radiate from your stomach. This is thermogenesis in action. Your body uses energy to break down these complex fats and carbohydrates, and that process itself generates internal heat. You are stoking the boiler for the day ahead. On the frontier, the composition of your diet shifts dramatically as the seasons turn. In the summer, you might have enjoyed fresh greens, berries, and light fish. But now, in the heart of the hunger moon, your palate has simplified into a singular focus on survival. You crave grease. You crave sugar. You crave anything that can be stored in the dark corners of your cellar or hung from the rafters of your cabin. The centerpiece of your winter kitchen is likely a large, heavy pot that stays on the edge of the hearth or hangs from a crane over the fire. This is the perpetual stew. It is a culinary tradition born of necessity and efficiency. You never truly empty this pot. Each day you add what you have. A handful of dried beans that have been soaking since yesterday. A few shriveled carrots or a turnip pulled from the sand pits in the root cellar. Perhaps a piece of venison or bear meat that has been cured in the smokehouse. As it simmers for hours, the flavors marry into a thick, brown broth. But more importantly, the heat of the fire breaks down the tough fibers of the meat and vegetables, making them easier for your body to digest. You take a bowl of this stew and notice the circles of yellow fat floating on the surface. In the modern world, someone might skim that fat off, but here you stir it back in. That fat represents the difference between a night of shivering and a night of restorative sleep. If you have been lucky during the fall hunt, you might have bear grease. It is prized above almost all other fats for its richness and its ability to stay liquid at lower temperatures. You might spread it on your bread or even take a spoonful of it directly if the day is particularly bitter. It coats your throat, warms your chest, and provides a slow burning energy that will last for hours. But survival is not just about the heavy meals. It is about the constant intake. You keep a piece of maple sugar or a bit of dried fruit in your pocket as you go out to check the traps or tend to the livestock. These simple sugars provide a quick spike of energy when you feel your movements becoming sluggish. You might also carry a piece of pemmican, a survival food learned from the indigenous people of the plains. It is a concentrated mixture of dried meat, melted fat, and sometimes dried berries, pounded into a dense cake. It is perhaps the perfect winter food. It does not spoil, it is easy to carry, and a small piece contains more energy than an entire modern meal. It is the ultimate caloric battery. You must also consider what you drink. In the winter, thirst can be a deceptive killer. Because the air is so dry, you lose water with every breath you take, visible as white puffs of steam. But drinking ice-cold water from the stream would be a mistake. It would lower your core temperature, forcing your body to waste precious energy heating that water up to match your internal heat. Instead, you keep a kettle of water near the fire at all times. You drink it hot, often infused with whatever herbs you manage to dry in the fall, or perhaps a bit of cider vinegar and honey. This warm liquid acts as a heat transfer system, warming you from the inside out and ensuring your blood remains fluid and moving. As the weeks of winter turn into months, you begin to notice the toll the season takes on your supplies. The barrels of salt pork are getting lower. The sacks of grain are feeling lighter. This is where the mental game of caloric fortification begins. You have to balance your need for heat with the reality of your inventory. You start to measure the flour more carefully. You might supplement your meals with Pioneer coffee, made from roasted acorns or chicory root, which provides the sensation of a full stomach and the comfort of a hot drink without using up your more valuable food stores. There is a psychological component to this as well. When the world outside is a white wasteland of silence and ice, the act of eating becomes the highlight of your day. The smell of frying salt pork or the sight of steam rising from a bowl of cornmeal mush is a powerful antidote to the winter blues. It is a reminder that you are still providing for yourself, that you are still winning the battle against the elements. A full belly brings a sense of security that no amount of blankets can provide. It allows your muscles to relax. It allows your mind to drift into a deep, heavy sleep, knowing that the fire inside you has enough wood to last until morning. You look at the members of your family across the table. Their cheeks are ruddy, not just from the wind, but from the heat of the meal they are consuming. You see the grease on their chins and the way they lean into the warmth of their bowls. In this moment, the cabin feels smaller and more intimate. The walls are thick, the fire is bright, but it is the meal in your stomach that truly makes this place a fortress. You have turned the fat of the land into the heat of your life. You have fortified yourself against the night, building a thermal shield from lard, grain, and grit. As you finish the last of your stew and wipe the bowl clean with a crust of bread, you feel a profound sense of readiness. Let the wind howl. Let the frost creep across the floorboards. You are fueled. You are warm. You are ready to survive another night on the edge of the world. You move away from the glowing embers of the hearth and feel the temperature drop instantly. It is a physical weight, a heavy curtain of frost that seems to press against your skin the moment you leave the radius of the fire. The cabin, which felt so cozy just an hour ago while the stew was bubbling, now feels like a hollow shell of logs and mud. The wind outside is a living thing, a restless spirit that prowls around the corners of your home, searching for a gap in the chinking or a thin spot in the door. You can hear the wood of the walls groaning as the sap inside them freezes and expands. It is a sound like a distant gunshot, sharp and startling in the silence of the wilderness. Your breath comes in ragged white puffs, and you realize that your only hope for survival until the sun rises is not the woodpile or the fireplace, but the people around you. In your modern life, you might value a bed of your own. You might think of sleep as a private, solitary retreat. But here on the frontier, privacy is a luxury that would quite literally kill you. You walk toward the sleeping area, where the beds are not the soft, elevated mattresses of the future. They are often simple wooden frames laced with tight ropes of hemp, or perhaps just a low platform built directly into the corner of the cabin. On top of this frame sits a tick, which is a large bag made of heavy canvas or coarse linen. You can hear it crunch as you sit down because it is stuffed with dried corn husks or wheat straw. In the summer, this rustling sound might be annoying, but tonight, it is the sound of insulation. You do not undress. That is a mistake you only make once. You might take off your heavy boots and your outer coat if it is damp, but you keep your wool trousers, your heavy stockings, and your flannel shirt on. You might even pull a knitted cap down over your ears. You watch as the rest of your family prepares to join you. There is no bashfulness here, and there is no hesitation. You all climb into the same space because you are each other's only furnace. You feel the weight of the quilts as they are pulled over the group. These are not the thin, decorative blankets of a later era. These are heavy, dense layers of wool and scraps of old clothing, stitched together with thousands of tiny, painstaking stitches. They are so heavy that they pin your legs to the mattress, making it difficult to turn over. This weight is comforting. It feels like being buried in warm earth. You find your place in the line. Usually, the smallest children are tucked into the very center of the pile. This is the warmest spot, protected on all sides by the larger bodies of parents or older siblings. You feel the heat radiating from the person next to you. It is a strange and intimate reality of frontier life. You are pressed shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip with your family. You can feel the steady rhythm of their breathing and the beating of their hearts. Within minutes, the pocket of air beneath the heavy quilts begins to warm. Your own body heat, trapped by the layers of wool and the thick straw mattress below, creates a microclimate. While the water in the wash basin 5 feet away is slowly turning into a solid block of ice, you are beginning to sweat. There is a specific etiquette to the shared bed. To save space and maximize heat, families often sleep in what they call spoon fashion. Everyone lies on their side, facing the same direction, nestled into the curve of the person behind them. When one person gets tired of lying on their right side and needs to shift, they might call out a signal, and the entire row of people will flip over in unison. It is a communal dance performed in the dark. You learn to move without waking the others, to slide your legs and adjust your position while maintaining that vital contact. If you pull away and create a gap, the precious heat escapes, and the cold air of the cabin rushes in like a physical blow. You might think about the travelers who sometimes knock on your door in the middle of a blizzard. On the frontier, the law of hospitality is absolute because to turn someone away is to sentence them to death. If a stranger arrives, you do not give them a separate room. You do not even give them a separate bed. You move over and make room in the family pile. It is not uncommon for a husband, a wife, and several children to share their bed with a wandering peddler or a land surveyor. To ensure modesty in these crowded conditions, Some families use a bundling board. This is a simple wooden plank that slides into grooves in the headboard and footboard, creating a temporary barrier between the family and the guest. It provides a thin sense of boundary while still allowing the warmth of the extra body to help keep the entire room from freezing. As the hours pass, the cabin grows even colder. You can hear the frost growing on the inside of the walls. It creates delicate, fern-like patterns of ice on the logs, shimmering in the moonlight. The silence of the winter night is profound. There are no machines, no humming refrigerators, and no distant traffic. There is only the wind, the occasional crack of the frozen timber, and the collective breathing of your family. You realize that this shared bed is the ultimate symbol of the frontier spirit. It is the understanding that no one survives this landscape alone. Your lives are literally woven together under these quilts. You find yourself drifting in and out of a light sleep. Every time you wake, you are aware of the cold air touching your nose and forehead, the only parts of your body exposed to the room. The air is so sharp it feels like it might cut your lungs, so you pull the edge of the quilt up over your face, breathing into the wool. The moisture from your breath dampens the fabric, and eventually, a small patch of ice might even form on the blanket near your mouth. But beneath the covers, you are safe. You are part of a huddle that has existed since the dawn of humanity, a circle of warmth against the vast, uncaring dark. The shared bed also serves as a place for stories and whispered conversations. In the darkness, before sleep takes everyone, you might hear your father talking about the crops for next year or your mother humming a low tune to soothe a restless toddler. It is the place where the bonds of the family are forged in the most literal sense. You know every snore, every sigh, and every restless twitch of your siblings. You know the exact weight of your brother's arm when he flings it across you in his sleep. In the modern world, this lack of personal space might feel suffocating, but here it feels like the ultimate security. As the first gray light of dawn begins to seep through the cracks in the door, the hardest part of the night arrives. The fire has long since died down to a few white ashes. The air in the cabin is at its most brutal. You can see the water bucket across the room, and you know the ice on top is thick enough to support the weight of a stone. No one wants to be the first to leave the warmth of the communal bed. You lie there, listening to the others wake up, feeling the shared reluctance. The transition from the 80-degree microclimate under the quilts to the 20-degree air of the cabin is a shock to the system that requires a special kind of courage. Eventually, someone, usually the father or the eldest son, will make the sacrifice. You feel the rush of cold air as they lift the edge of the quilt and slide out. The bed feels instantly colder for their absence. You hear the frantic scratching of a flint or the hurried rustle of kindling as they try to bring the hearth back to life. You huddle closer to the remaining people, trying to steal the last few minutes of communal warmth before the day begins. You realize that while the frontier is a place of rugged individualism and lonely pioneers, the secret to surviving its coldest nights was never about standing alone. It was about the press of a shoulder and the shared breath of a family huddled together in the dark. You are warm, you are alive, and you have made it to another morning because you were not alone. The heavy oak door of your cabin groans as you lean your shoulder against it, pushing back against a drift of snow that has accumulated since you last checked the perimeter. The transition is violent. One moment you are standing in the lingering warmth of the hearth, smelling the scent of charred hickory and dried herbs. The next, the atmosphere is replaced by a razor-sharp wind that seems to slice through your heavy wool coat as if it were made of paper. This is the reality of the frontier winter. You cannot simply stay inside and wait for the sun. If you do, your future will die in the dark. You step out into the white vacuum of the plains or the deep shadows of the timberline. Your eyes sting and water, the moisture freezing instantly into tiny crystals on your eyelashes. You are not out here to stretch your legs or clear your head. You are out here because of the low, mournful lowing of a cow coming from the direction of the lean-to. It is a sound of distress that vibrates in your own marrow. In this environment, your livestock are not just property. They are your bank account, your transportation, and your primary source of protein. If the oxen freeze, you cannot plow in the spring. If the milk cow perishes, your children will face the coming months with hollow cheeks. You begin to move through the snow, your boots crunching with a sound like breaking glass. The temperature has dropped so low that the very air feels brittle. You make your way toward what you call the frozen thicket. On the early frontier, many families did not have the luxury of a massive, finished barn with red paint and weather vanes. Those structures took years of stability and wealth to build. Instead, you have built a series of makeshift defenses. You have utilized a natural grove of dense cedar and willow, weaving additional cut branches into the standing growth to create a living wall. This thicket acts as a massive windbreak, a porous but effective barrier that breaks the back of the gale before it can reach the animals huddled at its center. As you approach the shelter, you see the breath of your animals rising in thick, rhythmic clouds of steam. It looks as though the very earth is breathing. You find your small herd huddled together, their heads tucked low and their tails to the wind. This is the communal heat of survival. In the center of the huddle, the temperature is perhaps 20 degrees warmer than the open air, but even that is barely enough. You see the frost covering their hides, a white crust that has turned their brown and black coats into ghosts of their former selves. Your first task is the most grueling and the most essential. You must provide them with water. It seems counterintuitive in a world made of snow and ice, but dehydration is a faster killer than the cold. When an animal becomes dehydrated, its metabolism slows down. Its internal furnace, fueled by the digestion of dry hay, begins to flicker and fade. You walk to the wooden trough, which is now topped with a layer of ice 4 inches thick. You raise a heavy iron crowbar or a dull axe, and you begin to strike. The sound of metal hitting ice is sharp and ringing, echoing off the frozen trees like a gunshot. Your muscles burn, and despite the sub-zero temperatures, a thin layer of sweat begins to form under your layers. This is dangerous. If that sweat cools, you will be in the same peril as the cattle. You break through, and the dark, freezing water gurgles up through the cracks. The cattle move toward the sound. They know. They thrust their muzzles into the slush, drinking deeply. You watch their throats move, feeling a sense of temporary relief. If they can drink, they can eat. If they can eat, they can burn. You move to the stack of hay that you labored over all through the humid, grueling days of July. You pull back the heavy buffalo robes or the tarred canvas you used to keep the moisture out. The hay is sweet-smelling and dry, a preserved piece of summer hidden in the heart of the storm. You begin to fork it out, not into a neat pile, but in a wide circle. You want every animal to have access without fighting. As they begin to chew, the mechanical process of their massive stomachs, the fermentation of the roughage, begins to generate internal heat. This is the secret of the frontier survivor. You are not just feeding them. You are stoking a biological boiler. But then you see her. A young heifer, perhaps only 2 years old, is standing slightly apart from the rest. She is shivering violently, a rhythmic shuddering that indicates her body is losing the battle to maintain its core temperature. She has found a low spot in the thicket where the wind is swirling, creating a vortex of biting air. You know you cannot leave her here. If she goes down, she will never get back up. In the morning, you would find her frozen into the very ground, a statuesque monument to the cruelty of the season. You grab her by the halter, your numb fingers fumbling with the frozen leather. You speak to her in a low, steady voice, a sound that is as much for your own comfort as it is for hers. You lead her toward the cabin. This is a scene that was repeated in thousands of sod huts and log cabins across the Great Plains and the northern woods. The line between the human world and the animal world blurred when the mercury bottomed out. You lead her through the door, the heat of the room causing her to let out a long, shuddering breath. Your spouse and children move the table and chairs to the wall. They do not complain about the smell of wet fur or the manure that clings to her hooves. They understand the stakes. You bring in a heavy pile of bedding straw and spread it near the hearth. The heifer sinks onto it, her weight shaking the floorboards. Throughout the night, you will take turns rubbing her flanks with dry burlap sacks to increase her circulation. You will feed her warm mash made of cornmeal and water. The house becomes a sanctuary, a shared space where the heat of the fire is a communal resource for every living soul under your roof. Outside, the gale continues to scream. It claws at the chinking between the logs and rattles the heavy door. You think of the rest of the herd out in the frozen thicket. You know that you will have to go back out in 2 hours. You will have to check the water again. You will have to make sure the windbreak is holding. You will have to ensure that the smaller calves are not being pushed to the outside of the huddle by the more dominant animals. The physical toll of this work is immense. Your hands are cracked and bleeding from the dry cold. The skins split into deep fissures that sting when the warmth of the cabin hits them. Your feet feel like heavy blocks of wood, and you have lost the sensation in the tips of your ears. But you do not sit down for long. The frontier is a place of constant motion. To stop moving is to concede. You look at the heifer by the fire. Her eyes, large and dark, reflect the flickering orange light of the embers. She has stopped shivering. The warmth is sinking into her bones. You know that if you can keep her and the others alive until the sun breaks through the gray clouds, you have won another round. The relationship between the frontier family and their livestock was one of profound mutual dependence. You provide the shelter, the broken ice, and the summer hay. They provide the milk, the power, and the very possibility of a future. As the wind howls a particularly high, mournful note, you stand up and reach for your coat once more. It is time to check the thicket again. You wrap a wool scarf around your face until only your eyes are visible. You prepare yourself for the physical impact of the cold, drawing a deep breath of the relatively warm indoor air before you open the door. The cycle of the frontier night continues. It is a vigil of ice and iron, a relentless struggle to protect the lifeblood of the farm from the bitter, unyielding gale. You step out, the door slamming shut behind you, and disappear once more into the white dark. The moment you step away from the heavy wooden door, the world as you know it ceases to exist. There is no horizon. There is no sky. There is only a churning, violent wall of white that hits your face with the force of 1,000 tiny needles. You are standing on your own porch, a place you have walked 1,000 times, yet you could be in the middle of a vast and frozen ocean for all the landmarks you can see. The wind is a physical weight, pressing against your chest and trying to knock the very breath from your lungs. It howls with a frequency that vibrates in your teeth, a sound so loud and all-encompassing that it drowns out your own thoughts. In this frozen chaos, your eyes are useless. You blink, but your eyelashes are already rimed with frost, sticking together every time you try to see. You reach out a gloved hand, fumbling in the screaming air until your fingers brush against something solid. It is coarse, frozen stiff, and vibrating with the incredible tension of the gale. This is your guide rope. It is a humble length of hemp or braided twine, perhaps no thicker than your thumb, but in this moment, it is the most important thing in your entire universe. It is the thread that keeps you connected to the world of the living. Frontier families learned the necessity of the guide rope through the harshest of teachers. Experience told them that a man could walk out to the woodpile 10 feet away and never be seen again until the spring thaw. The prairie blizzard is not just a snowstorm. It is a sensory deprivation chamber. It creates a phenomenon where the wind swirls the snow so perfectly that you lose all sense of up and down. People have been found frozen to death just 3 feet from their own back doors, having spent hours walking in circles, unable to find the very walls that would have saved them. You have heard the stories of fathers found in the spring, curled up in a snowbank just outside the kitchen window, their fingers frozen into claws as they tried to find the latch they could not see. You wrap the rope around your palm, feeling the rough fibers even through your heavy wool mittens. You take a step, then another. Every inch is a battle. The snow is already waist-deep in drifts, and the wind tries to pull your hand away from the line. You have to lean your entire body weight into the storm, pushing against a wall of air that feels as solid as stone. You cannot see your boots. You cannot see your hands. You only feel that vibrating cord. You imagine the path in your mind, from the porch to the corner of the house, from the house to the well, from the well to the heavy door of the sod-dye or the barn. Why are you out here? You are out here because the fire is dying and the woodbox is empty. Or perhaps you are out here because the cattle are bawling in the barn, their nostrils freezing shut with ice, and they need you to clear their breath and toss them hay. Survival on the frontier did not pause for the weather. The animals had to be fed. The water had to be hauled. If you did not make this journey, your family would freeze or your livelihood would perish. The rope is the bridge between survival and catastrophe. Think about the day before the storm hit. You saw the dark clouds bruising the western sky. You felt the sudden, eerie drop in temperature that turned the afternoon sun into a cold and distant ghost. You did not wait for the first flake to fall. You went out with your hammer and your stakes. You tied the rope to the sturdy post by the kitchen door and ran it all the way to the barn. You checked the knots 3 times. You made sure the line was taut enough to stand up to a 100-mile-per-hour gust. You knew that once the white dark descended, you would be blind. You were building your future self a map that could be felt but not seen. There is a unique kind of terror that comes with being lost in a blizzard. It is not just the cold. It is the isolation. You are only 50 feet from your children, who are sitting by the stove, yet you are completely alone. If you let go of this rope, you are a ghost. You could scream for hours and the wind would simply swallow the sound before it reached the house. You have to trust the rope more than you trust your own instincts. Your internal compass will tell you to turn left when the rope tells you to go straight. Your mind will play tricks on you, making you think you see a light or a doorway where there is only more snow and more shadow. But you do not let go. You keep your hand closed tight around the hemp. The physics of the storm are incredible. The friction of the wind against the rope creates a hum. It is a low, moaning sound that follows the line all the way to the barn. Sometimes the ice builds up on the rope so thickly that it becomes a heavy, glass-like cable. You have to break the ice with your grip as you move, a rhythmic cracking sound that is the only thing you can hear besides the roar of the gale. Your shoulder aches from the effort of holding on, and the frostbite begins to nip at the sliver of skin exposed between your hat and your scarf. During the great blizzards of the late 19th century, teachers in small one-room schoolhouses used these ropes to save their students. When the storm hit without warning, these women and men would tie the children together in a long line, using a single rope to guide the entire group through the whiteout to the nearest farmhouse. If one child stumbled, the rope held them. If the teacher lost her bearings, the rope anchored them to the building they had just left. It was a literal lifeline. Without it, dozens of children would have wandered into the fields to be buried by the drifts. You continue your slow progress. The wind shifts, hitting you from the side, and for a second you are knocked off your feet. Your heart hammers against your ribs as you feel yourself sliding into a drift. Your world spins. For a terrifying moment, you cannot tell which way is up. But your hand is still clamped on the rope. You pull yourself back up, hand over hand, using the line to steady your shaking legs. You are gasping for air, but the air is so cold it makes your lungs ache. You pull your scarf tighter and keep moving. The rope is also a communication tool. In some families, a series of tugs could signal to those inside that you had reached the barn safely. 2 tugs meant you were okay. 3 tugs meant you were starting back. If the rope went slack, those inside knew the worst had happened. They knew the line had snapped or that you had been swept away. It was a silent conversation held through the tension of a cord, the only connection between 2 islands of warmth in a sea of ice. Once you finally reach the barn, the change is staggering. You find the door, slide it open just enough to squeeze through, and throw your weight against it to shut out the storm. The silence inside is heavy. You can hear the rhythmic breathing of the horses and the rustle of hay. It is dark, but it is a safe darkness. You lean against the door, your breath coming in ragged gasps that turn into thick clouds of steam. Your hands are numb, and your face feels like it has been scrubbed with sandpaper. But you made it. You go about your work, breaking the ice in the water troughs and pitching hay to the shivering livestock. The animals press against you, seeking your warmth, their eyes wide and dark in the gloom. You know you cannot stay here long. The temperature in the barn is dropping, and your family is waiting for you back in the house. You check your pockets for the extra matches you brought, just in case. You prepare yourself for the return trip. The journey back is even harder. You are exhausted now, and the adrenaline that fueled your walk to the barn is beginning to fade. Your core temperature has dropped, and your movements are slower, more sluggish. But the rope is still there, waiting for you outside the door. You reach out, find the frozen line, and begin the trek back to the house. This time, the wind is at your back, pushing you, trying to hurry your steps. You have to resist the urge to run. If you trip now, you might not have the strength to get back up. You keep your grip firm. You follow the hum of the line. When your hand finally strikes the cold, rough wood of the house, the relief is so sharp it almost brings you to tears. You find the latch, heave the door open against the incredible pressure of the air, and tumble back into the world of shadows and firelight. The door slams shut, and the roar of the storm is suddenly muffled, reduced to a distant, angry growl. You are safe. You are home. You look at your red, swollen hands and then at the door. You know that as long as that rope holds, the world outside cannot claim you. You have navigated the white dark, and you have survived to see another night. You wake up in the pitch darkness of a mid-January morning, and the first thing you notice is not the cold. You are used to the cold by now. It is a constant companion that lives in the corners of the room and nips at your heels. No, the first thing you notice is the silence. It is a heavy, pressurized silence that seems to push against the very walls of your cabin. Usually, You can hear the wind whistling through the dry tall grass or the occasional groan of a distant tree limb. But today there is nothing. You swing your legs out from under the heavy buffalo robes and your feet meet the freezing floorboards. You move toward the small window, the only portal to the world outside, and you find that it is no longer a window. It is a solid block of white. The snow has drifted so high that it has completely encased the glass. You are no longer living in a house. You are living in a tomb of ice. You reach for the door and push, but it does not budge. You throw your shoulder against the heavy timber, and you feel the massive weight of the drift on the other side. It is as solid as a stone wall. You are snowed in. At first, there is a strange sense of relief. The chores of the outside world are suddenly impossible. You cannot haul more wood from the far pile, and you cannot check on the livestock in the lean-to. You are trapped. But as the hours turn into days, that relief begins to curdle into something else. This is the mental toll of deep winter isolation, a psychological battle that many frontier families found more difficult to survive than the physical hunger or the biting frost. Your world has suddenly shrunk to a space no larger than 12 feet by 12 feet. Within these four walls, you must eat, sleep, work, and exist with your entire family. Imagine the air inside. It is thick and stagnant. It smells of wood smoke, old grease, damp wool, and the unwashed bodies of 4 or 5 people who have not seen a bathtub in months. There is no ventilation because every crack has been stuffed with rags to keep the freezing air out. The light is a dim, flickering yellow from a single tallow candle or the low orange glow of the hearth. Because the windows are buried, you lose all sense of time. Is it noon? Is it 4 in the afternoon? Without the movement of the sun across the floor, the day becomes a flat, gray expanse that never seems to end. This is when the irritability begins. In the first few days, you might enjoy the stories and the shared warmth. But by day 5, the sound of your husband chewing his salt pork becomes an unbearable roar in your ears. The way your sister hums the same 3 notes of a hymn over and over makes you want to scream into the rafters. Every small habit, every repetitive gesture, and every sigh becomes a potential spark for a confrontation. You are all on edge, vibrating with a nervous energy that has nowhere to go. You cannot go for a walk to blow off steam. You cannot retreat to another room. You are constantly touching elbows with the people you love, and yet, in this cramped space, you have never felt more alone. The frontier journals often speak of a condition they called prairie madness. It was a slow erosion of the mind caused by the combination of sensory deprivation and the crushing weight of the silence. You begin to listen to the silence. It is so profound that you can hear the blood rushing in your own ears. You start to imagine sounds. You think you hear a voice calling from outside the door, or the scratching of a beast on the roof. You know it is just the snow settling or the logs contracting in the cold, but your mind is hungry for any kind of input. It starts to invent things to fill the void. You find yourself staring at the grain of the wood in the wall for hours, tracing the patterns until they look like faces or maps of countries you will never visit. To survive this, you must find work. On the frontier, work was not just about productivity. It was a form of prayer. It was the only thing keeping the madness at bay. You take up a piece of seasoned hickory and you begin to whittle. You carve a spoon, then another, then a handle for a tool you might not use for months. Your hands must stay busy. If your hands are idle, your mind begins to wander into the dark places. You sew and mend clothes that have already been mended a dozen times. You unpick an old sweater and knit it back into a scarf, just to have something for your fingers to do. You read the same 3 books you brought from the East until you know every sentence by heart. You read the almanac aloud to the children, even the parts about planting schedules for crops that feel like a dream from another life. The children are the hardest to manage. They are like caged animals, full of a restless, frantic energy. They wrestle on the floor until someone gets hurt, or they mope in the corner with dull eyes. You have to invent games. You play cat's cradle with a piece of string. You tell stories of the world before the snow, of green trees and the smell of rain on hot dust. You try to teach them lessons, scratching letters into the soot at the back of the fireplace. But even you begin to lose track of why it matters. In this white darkness, the future feels like a fiction. There is only the now, and the now is cold and cramped. Then there is the fear. It sits in the pit of your stomach like a cold stone. You wonder if the chimney will stay clear, or if the weight of the snow on the roof will finally snap the ridgepole. You wonder if the woodpile inside will last until the drifts melt enough to dig out. You look at the dwindling supply of flour and the shrinking slab of bacon, and you perform the mental math of survival over and over. If we eat only 2 meals a day, we can last 3 weeks. If we eat 1 meal, we can last 6. You do not talk about this with the others. You keep the fear hidden behind a mask of calm, but you see the same shadow in their eyes when they think you are not looking. The isolation does strange things to your perception of yourself. Without the reflection of a community, without the news of the world or the sight of another human face outside your family, you begin to feel as though you are the last people on Earth. The world beyond the snowbank might as well be on the moon. You feel a sense of profound insignificance. The great white wilderness does not care about your survival. It does not care about your name or your history. It is a vast, indifferent force that has simply swallowed you whole. This realization can lead to a deep, hollow depression. Some people stopped talking altogether. They would sit by the fire for days, staring into the embers, refusing to eat or move. They had simply given up the ghost before the body had even failed. But then, one morning, something changes. You wake up and the light is different. It is not that dull, suffocating blue. There is a faint, golden glow pressing against the top of the snow-blocked window. You hear a sound. It is a sharp, cracking noise from somewhere outside. It is the sound of the crust of the snow breaking under the heat of a rising sun. You rush to the door and you heave your weight against it. It moves an inch, then 2. You dig with your hands, clawing at the packed white wall until a breath of fresh, freezing air hits your face. That first breath of outside air is like a shot of whiskey. It burns your lungs, but it clears the fog in your brain instantly. You climb out of the tunnel you have dug, and you stand on top of the world. The snow is so deep that you are standing level with the roof of your own house. The landscape is a blinding, brilliant white that hurts your eyes, but you do not care. You are out. You are alive. You look at your family as they crawl out behind you, squinting in the light, and you feel a rush of affection that replaces the irritation of the past weeks. You have survived the long night of the soul. You are still the same people, but you are changed. The isolation has burned away the non-essentials. You have learned the exact shape of your own mind when it is pushed to the brink. You have faced the white silence, and you have found that even in the deepest winter, the human spirit is a fire that is very, very hard to put out. Imagine you are lying in the dark, somewhere in the middle of a January night. The fire has burned down to a pile of glowing orange eyes in the hearth, and the temperature inside your small log cabin has plummeted. You can hear the logs of the walls popping and groaning like gunshots as the moisture inside the wood freezes and expands. You reach out to pull the heavy wool blankets tighter around your chin, and you feel the fine, crystalline dust of snow that has sifted through the cedar shingles on the roof and settled across your bed like a burial shroud. This is the frontier winter. It is a season of silence, but it is also a season of hidden dangers that you cannot shoot with a rifle or trap for their fur. In this world, a simple scratch, a lingering chill, or a blackened toe can be a death sentence. There are no hospitals. There are no pharmacies. There is no doctor within 50 miles, and even if there were, he would have to ride through 5 feet of snow to reach you. You are the doctor, the nurse, and the apothecary. Your survival depends on what you have stored in your cellar, what you have learned from the local indigenous people, and the sheer, stubborn will to keep breathing. Let us start with the most immediate threat of the deep cold. You have been out in the woods all afternoon, swinging a heavy axe to keep the woodpile high. You felt the bite of the air at first, but then your hands and feet went numb. You thought that was a good thing. You thought the pain had simply gone away. But when you finally stumble back into the cabin and pull off your heavy leather boots and your thick wool socks, you see it. Your toes are not pink. They are a ghostly, waxy white. They feel like stones attached to the ends of your feet. You are facing frostbite, or what the old-timers call the frost nip. Your first instinct is to thrust your feet toward the roaring fire or plunge them into a bucket of hot water. You must stop yourself. In the 19th century, you might have heard the folk wisdom that you should rub the frozen flesh with snow to draw the frost out. This is perhaps the most dangerous myth of the frontier. Rubbing frozen skin with jagged ice crystals is like rubbing it with sandpaper. It tears the damaged tissue and invites the very gangrene you are trying to avoid. Instead, you must use the slow thaw. You wrap your feet in cool, dry cloths and let the heat of the room slowly bring the blood back to the surface. And then, the pain begins. As the blood vessels dilate and the nerves scream back to life, you experience the hot ache, a throbbing, burning sensation that makes you want to howl into the night. If you are lucky, the skin turns a deep, angry red and blisters. If you are unlucky, it turns black. Once the skin goes black and the smell of rot begins to fill the cabin, the only tool left in the medicine chest is a bone saw and a bottle of cheap whiskey. This is why you check your children's fingers and toes every single time they come through that door. You look for the white spots of the frost as if you are looking for signs of the plague. But the cold does not just attack from the outside. It seeps into the lungs. In the 19th century, the word pneumonia was less common than the terrifying phrase lung fever. It starts with a dry, hacking cough that echoes against the timber walls. Then comes the fever. You feel the forehead of your child, and it is like touching a hot stove. Their breath becomes short and shallow, sounding like a rusted saw cutting through green wood. How do you fight an enemy you cannot see? You turn to the old ways. You reach for the jar of goose grease you saved from the autumn hunt. You mix it with a little bit of turpentine and perhaps some crushed peppermint or eucalyptus if you were able to trade for it in the summer. You rub this pungent, oily mixture onto the chest and back until the skin is slick. This is not just about the medicine. It is about the heat. You take a piece of red flannel, heated by the fire, and pin it over the grease. The smell of the turpentine fills the small room, stinging your eyes, but it opens the airways. If the congestion is deep, you create a mustard plaster. You mix dry mustard flour with a bit of wheat flour and water to make a paste, then spread it between 2 cloths. You lay this on the chest of the sick. You have to be careful. Leave it on too long, and the mustard will literally blister the skin. But the goal is to create a counter-irritant, to draw the blood to the surface and break up the iron grip of the phlegm in the lungs. You sit by the bed all night, moving the cloth, checking the skin, and listening to the rhythmic struggle for air, knowing that if the fever does not break by dawn, you may be digging a hole in the frozen earth behind the barn. The medicine chest of a frontier family is a strange and bitter collection. There are no sugar-coated pills here. You have tins of lard, bags of dried herbs like horehound for coughs, and yarrow for stopping blood. You have a bottle of castor oil, which is the universal remedy for almost every internal ailment, despite its gag-inducing taste. You might have a small vial of laudanum, an opium tincture used for the kind of pain that makes a person lose their mind, but you use it sparingly. It is expensive and it is dangerous. And then there is the spring sickness, which we now know as scurvy. By February, your stores of dried fruit and vegetables are running low. Your diet has been narrowed down to salted pork, dried corn, and heavy biscuits. Your gums begin to bleed. You feel a strange, crushing lethargy in your limbs. Old wounds that had healed years ago suddenly begin to open up again. You are literally falling apart because your body lacks the vitamin C found in fresh greens. To survive this, you have to look to the trees. You go out into the snow and strip the needles from the white pine. You boil them into a bitter, resinous tea. It tastes like drinking a forest, but it is packed with the nutrients you need to keep your teeth in your head. You might dig under the snow for the roots of the dandelion or the first shoots of wintergreen. You learn that the wilderness is both the cause of your suffering and the source of your cure. There is a psychological weight to frontier medicine that is hard to grasp today. When you are the one holding the lancet or the poultice, the responsibility is absolute. If your husband's axe slips and cuts deep into his thigh, you are the one who must sew the skin back together using a common needle and silk thread, hoping the vinegar you used to wash the wound is enough to keep the infection at bay. You become intimately familiar with the smells of the body in distress, the sweet smell of a certain type of fever, or the sharp, acidic scent of a wound that is turning sour. You also learn the power of the communal knowledge of women. In the dead of winter, a midwife or a neighborhood healer might travel miles on snowshoes to reach a cabin where a woman is in labor or a patriarch is fading. These women carried the oral history of survival. They knew which bark could be boiled to break a fever and which roots could ease the pain of a toothache. They were the thin line between a family thriving and a family vanishing. When the sun finally begins to climb higher in the sky and the first thaws of March arrive, you look at your family. You are all thinner. Your skin is sallow from months of living in the dim light of tallow candles and smoky fires. You may have a few less toes among you, or a cough that will linger until the humidity of July arrives. But you have made it. You have used the grease of animals, the needles of trees, and the heat of the hearth to ward off the darkness. You realize that out here, medicine is not a science of certainties. It is a series of gambles made in the dark. It is the grit to do what is necessary when there are no other options. You have faced the fever and the frostbite, and you have learned that the human body is surprisingly resilient, provided there is a hand to tend the fire and a heart brave enough to face the cold. This was the price of the frontier, a toll paid in scars and wood smoke, ensuring that when the spring finally broke, there would be voices left to greet the greening earth. You wake up in the pitch black of a late January morning, and the silence is so heavy it feels like a physical weight pressing down on your chest. The fire has died down to a few pulsing orange eyes buried deep in the ash, and the air inside the cabin is so cold that your breath does not just mist. It seems to hang in the air like a ghost. This is the moment you have been dreading since the first leaf turned gold in the autumn. It is the time of the midwinter tally. You cannot put it off any longer. You need to know exactly how much life you have left in your larder, and how much of it you are going to have to sacrifice to see the first green shoots of April. You swing your legs out from under the heavy buffalo robes and the shock of the floorboards hits you like a blow. The wood is so cold it feels wet. You quickly pull on your wool stockings and your heavy boots, but your fingers are stiff and fumbling. You light a single tallow candle, shielding the small, sputtering flame with your palm. In this flickering circle of yellow light, you begin your walk toward the root cellar. This is not a casual trip for a snack. This is a cold, hard calculation of survival. As you lift the heavy trapdoor in the floor, the smell rises up to meet you. It is a thick, earthy scent of damp soil, cold stone, and the faint, sweet rot of a turnip that has gone soft. You descend the narrow ladder, feeling the temperature drop even further as you move below the frost line. This small, dark space is the heart of your world. Everything you worked for during the blistering heat of the July harvest is gathered here, and every time you look at it, the pile seems smaller than you remembered. You hold your candle high and the shadows dance across the crates. You start with the potatoes. In October, the bins were overflowing, a mountain of brown, dirt-crusted sustenance. Now you see the floorboards at the bottom of the first bin. You reach in and feel the skins. They are starting to wrinkle. Some have sprouted long, pale, sickly-looking eyes that reach out like fingers in the dark. You have to rub those off, knowing that every sprout is the potato eating itself, stealing the calories you need for your own body. You count the remaining bushels, doing the mental math. If you limit the family to 3 potatoes a day instead of 5, you might make it to the thaw. It is a grim arithmetic. Next, you move to the salted meat. You pull the heavy lid off the brine barrel and the sharp, metallic smell of salt and preserved pork fills your nostrils. You reach into the cold, gray liquid, your arm numbing instantly, and feel for the bottom. There are fewer slabs left than there were 2 weeks ago. You realize with a start that you have been too generous with the stews. You have been eating as if the winter would be short, but the thick ice on the window panes upstairs tells a different story. You pull your dripping arm out and wipe it on a rag, knowing that from this day forward, the meat will be a luxury, a flavoring rather than a main course. You will shave off translucent slices of salt pork, frying them until they are little more than grease and crunch, using that grease to flavor a pot of plain cornmeal mush. The cornmeal itself is in the large wooden chest in the corner. You lift the lid and the white dust puffs up. You use a wooden scoop to level it out, marking the side of the chest with a piece of charcoal. This is your baseline. If the level drops below this mark before the end of February, you will be in deep trouble. You think about the children sleeping upstairs. You think about their growing bones and their constant gnawing hunger. You realize that you will have to start thinning the porridge. More water, less meal. It will fill their bellies with warmth, but it will not stick to their ribs. You feel a pang of guilt that is sharper than the cold. You turn to the dried fruits and the preserves. The jars of pickled beans and the strings of dried apple rings are the only things that keep the scurvy away, the only things that remind you of the sun. You count the jars like a miser counts gold. 1 jar for every Sunday. That is all you can afford. If a guest comes by, someone traveling through the snow in need of a meal, you will have to share. And that thought brings a momentary flicker of resentment that you immediately feel ashamed of. On the frontier, hospitality is a law, but winter turns that law into a heavy burden. You climb back up the ladder and close the trapdoor, feeling as though you have just looked into the eyes of a wolf. But the tally is not finished. You wrap your heavy coat around your shoulders, tie your scarf tight over your nose and mouth, and step out into the blinding white of the yard. The snow is waist-deep in places, and you have to move through the narrow trenches you have shoveled to reach the woodpile. The woodpile is the clock by which you measure the remaining weeks of winter. When you stacked it in the fall, it was a wall of oak and hickory that towered over your head. It looked like enough to burn for a lifetime. Now the wall has crumbled. There is a great gap in the center, a hole where the coldest nights of December and January have eaten your fuel. You look at the remaining cords and compare them to the gray, heavy sky. The sky looks like it still holds 1,000 tons of snow. You realize you cannot keep the fire roaring 24 hours a day anymore. You will have to let it die down to a simmer during the afternoon, huddled in blankets to save the wood for the sub-zero hours of the night. You might even have to start breaking down the old fence rails or the lean-to by the creek if a late blizzard hits in March. You move to the small barn to check on the livestock. This is the hardest part of the tally. You can hear the rhythmic, heavy breathing of the ox and the low, plaintive lowing of the milk cow. They are thinner than they should be. Their hip bones are beginning to show through their shaggy winter coats. You climb the ladder to the hayloft and look at the remaining stalks. The hay is dusty and dry, and there is not much of it left. You had hoped to keep the cow milking through the spring, but you see now that you will have to cut her rations. If she stops giving milk, the children lose their best source of fat and protein. But if you feed her everything now, she will starve to death in 3 weeks, and you will have nothing at all. You stand there in the loft, the smell of dry grass and animal heat surrounding you, and you make the decision. You will mix the hay with dried corn husks and even a little bit of the pine boughs you can gather from the woods. It is poor fodder, but it might keep their stomachs full enough to keep them standing. You look at the ox, the powerful beast that will be needed to pull the plow the moment the ground softens. If he is too weak to work, you cannot plant. If you cannot plant, you will not survive the next winter. The cycle of the frontier is a relentless wheel, and right now you are caught in the spokes. You head back into the cabin, your face stinging from the wind. You sit at the small table and pick up a lead pencil and a scrap of paper, or perhaps you just do the sums in your head if paper is too precious. You list it all out. The potatoes, the salt pork, the cornmeal, the wood, the hay. You are managing a tiny, isolated kingdom, and your resources are vanishing. This is the moment where the romance of the wilderness disappears, replaced by the grim reality of logistics. Survival is not just about bravery or being a good shot with a rifle. It is about the careful, disciplined management of a dwindling supply of energy. You look at the hearth. A single log is burning there, the blue flames licking the bark. You resist the urge to throw another one on. Instead, you move your chair closer to the heat, wrapping a shawl over your shoulders. You think about the ways you can stretch what you have. You remember stories of families who ground up dried corn cobs to mix with their flour, or who boiled the same soup bones for a week until the water was clear and tasteless. You pray it does not come to that, but you prepare your mind for it nonetheless. The midwinter tally is a sobering ritual, but it is also what saves you. By facing the empty spaces in your larder now, you prevent the total emptiness that would come in March if you remain blind. You are the guardian of this little flame of life in the middle of a frozen wasteland. As you blow out the candle to save the wax, you sit in the gray light of the morning, watching the snow begin to fall again outside the window. You have done the math. You know the cost. Now all that is left is to endure, one carefully measured spoonful at a time, until the world turns green again. You wake up one morning and the air feels heavy, but for the first time in months, it does not bite your lungs. There is a sound you have almost forgotten, a steady, rhythmic tapping against the cedar shingles of the roof. It is not the dry, sand-like rattle of wind-blown ice. It is the sound of water. You sit up in your bedding, and instead of the usual cloud of white breath greeting the morning, there is only a soft, damp chill. You push open the heavy door of your cabin, and the world has changed. The blinding white expanse of the prairie has turned a bruised, mottled gray. The snow is shrinking, retreating from the bases of the trees and the edges of the house, leaving behind a dark, sodden ring of mud. This is the moment every frontier family prays for, yet it is also the moment that can kill you. You step outside, and your boots sink deep into the slush. The smell is overwhelming. It is the scent of wet earth, of decaying grass, and the sharp metallic tang of melting ice. For a few days, you allow yourself to believe the ordeal is over. You pull the heavy quilts from the beds and hang them over a rope line to catch the pale, weak sunlight. You might even leave the door cracked for an hour to let the stale, smoky air of the winter escape. You feel a surge of energy, a desperate need to move, to clean, and to prepare for the planting season that feels like it is just around the corner. But you are living in a fool's paradise. In the journals of the pioneers, this was known as the false spring. It is a meteorological trap that has claimed more lives than the steady, predictable deep freeze of January. The danger lies in your own relief. Because you believe the winter is broken, you begin to use your resources more freely. You burn the last of your good hardwood, thinking you will not need it for much longer. You give the livestock a little extra grain to help them recover their strength. You let your guard down, and that is exactly when the sky begins to change. You notice it first in the afternoon. The wind, which had been blowing softly from the south, suddenly dies down. The silence is eerie. The melting stops. The dripping from the eaves freezes into long, jagged spears of glass. Then the wind returns, but it has shifted. It is coming from the northwest now, and it carries a low, guttering moan that vibrates in the walls of the cabin. The temperature does not just drop, crashes. You watch the thermometer on the porch post, and the red line of mercury retreats as if it is terrified. It falls 20 degrees in an hour, then 30. The mud under your feet turns to iron, trapping your footprints in jagged ridges. The rain that was falling earlier turns to sleet, and then to a fine, driving powder that is so thick you can no longer see the barn only 50 feet away. This is the late-season blizzard, the cruelest storm of all. You are caught in a race against time. You have to get the quilts back inside before they freeze solid on the line. You have to haul as much wood as you can carry into the house before the visibility drops to zero. If you are caught outside when the true whiteout hits, you will lose your sense of direction in seconds. People have been found frozen to death just 10 feet from their own front doors, having wandered in circles in a world where there is no up, no down, and no path home. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere shifts from hope to a grim, familiar desperation. The heat you managed to build up during the thaw is sucked out through the cracks in the logs by the howling wind. You realize with a sinking heart that your woodpile is nearly gone. You looked at that pile a week ago and thought it would last until April, but this storm is different. It is violent and hungry. You find yourself back in the center of the room, huddled around the stove, but the fuel you have left is poor. Maybe it is green wood you cut in a hurry, or maybe it is the last of the corn cobs and dried buffalo chips. It burns fast and hot, but it leaves you in the cold the moment you stop feeding the fire. This is when the true test of frontier survival begins. When the wood runs out during a late-season storm, you have to make choices that would have seemed unthinkable in November. You look around the small, dim room at the few possessions you own. You start with the small things. You break up a wooden stool that has a loose leg. You burn the slats from a spare bed frame. You move on to the shelving you worked so hard to level and hang. Each piece of furniture represents a piece of your civilization, a sign that you were more than just a survivor, that you were a person with a home. One by one, those signs of home are fed into the iron maw of the stove to keep the frost from creeping across the floor. You might find yourself twisting hay into tight, hard knots known as cats. It is a grueling, hand-blistering task. You sit in the dim light, your fingers raw and bleeding, twisting the dry prairie grass until it is dense enough to burn for more than a few minutes. It produces a flickering, yellow flame and a massive amount of ash, but very little lasting heat. You have to feed the stove every 10 minutes, around the clock. Sleep becomes a luxury you cannot afford. If you fall into a deep sleep, the fire will die, the hay will turn to gray soot, and the cold will claim the room before you wake. The psychological toll of the false spring is perhaps the heaviest burden to carry. In the middle of January, you expect the cold. You are braced for it. But in March, after you have felt the sun on your face and heard the birds return, the return of the blizzard feels like a personal betrayal. You feel a sense of exhaustion that goes deeper than your bones. You are tired of the smoke, tired of the smell of unwashed bodies and burnt grass, and tired of the constant, gnawing fear. You look at your children, huddled under a mountain of coats and rugs, and you wonder if you have made a terrible mistake in coming to this place. Outside, the storm shows no mercy. This is the time of the legendary schoolchildren's blizzard of 1888, where the morning was so warm that children went to school without their coats, only to be trapped in their schoolhouses or lost in the drifts on their way home when the tempest struck in the afternoon. You think of those stories and you bolt your door. You realize that the only thing standing between your family and the end is your ability to stay awake and keep that tiny fire gasping for life. You reach a point of total sensory deprivation. The wind is a constant, deafening roar that makes it impossible to speak without shouting. The windows are completely blocked by snow drifts that have piled up to the roofline, plunging the interior of the cabin into a permanent, murky twilight. You lose track of time. Is it morning? Is it evening? The only clock you have is the emptying corner where your fuel was stored. When the last of the furniture is gone, when the hay is exhausted, you might even begin to peel the bark from the interior logs or burn the very straw from the mattresses you are sleeping on. Then, as suddenly as it began, the wind dies. The roaring stops, replaced by a silence so profound it makes your ears ring. You dig your way out of the door, carving a tunnel through the packed, icy snow. When you emerge, the world is brilliant and blinding. The sun is out, and the sky is a hard, crystalline blue. The temperature is still low, but the air is still. You look across the landscape and you see the chimneys of your neighbors beginning to smoke. You see the tops of the fences just peeking out from the drifts. You have survived the cruelest trick the wilderness can play. The false spring was a test of your endurance and your willingness to sacrifice everything you own just to see the sun again. As you stand there in the snow, shivering and hollow-eyed, you hear it again. Faint, distant drip. The melting has started once more. This time, the earth feels different. The mud is deeper, the air is softer, and the ice is thinner. You know there may be one more frost, perhaps even another light dusting of white, but the back of the winter is finally broken. You go back inside to what is left of your home, and you begin the long, slow process of rebuilding from the ashes of your own survival. Now, the real spring can begin. The first thing you notice is not the sight of the green grass, for that is still weeks away, buried under the stubborn, crystalline remains of the final drifts. Instead, it is the sound. For months, the world has been hushed. a muffled landscape where every footfall was swallowed by the deep powder, and every word seemed to freeze in the air before it could reach another person's ear. But now, as you stand on the threshold of your cabin, you hear it. It is a soft, rhythmic drip, then a trickle. Somewhere down the slope, the creek is beginning to groan and crack, its icy armor finally succumbing to the persistent, warming touch of the March sun. You lean against the doorframe, and for the first time in what feels like an eternity, the air hitting your face does not bite. It carries the heavy, intoxicating scent of damp earth and decaying pine needles. The great winter of the frontier is finally releasing its grip. You step outside, your heavy boots sinking not into dry snow, but into a thick, clinging mud that threatens to pull the leather right off your feet. This is the season of the great melt, a time of transition that is arguably as difficult as the frozen nights you have just survived. Yet it is colored by an overwhelming sense of relief. You look back at your home, the small timber structure that has been your entire universe for the last 4 months. Its logs are stained dark with moisture, and the chinking you worked so hard to maintain is crumbling in places where the ice expanded and contracted. The roof, which once groaned under the weight of several tons of snow, now seems to stand a little taller. You realize then that the cabin is not just a building. It is a testament. Every scar on those logs and every soot stain around the chimney is a mark of a battle won. You begin the process of airing out the house, a ritual that feels almost holy. You throw open the heavy door and the small, shuttered windows, allowing the cool, moving air to chase away the stale smell of wood smoke, old grease, and unwashed wool. As the breeze sweeps through the single room, you watch the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light. You see the hearth, now filled with cold ashes, and you remember the nights when that pile of glowing embers was the only thing standing between your family and a quiet, frozen end. You look at the heavy quilts piled on the bedsteads. They are frayed at the edges and thin in the middle, worn down by the constant friction of shivering bodies huddled together for warmth. You will wash them in the creek soon, scrubbing away the winter, but you will never look at them the same way again. They were not just blankets. They were armor. Survival on the frontier was never just about the physical act of staying warm. As you walk through your muddy yard, clearing away the debris that the snow hidden for months, you reflect on the internal change that has taken place within you and your family. The long nights of the frontier did something to the human spirit that prosperity and comfort could never achieve. You think about the quiet conversations held by the fire when the wind was howling so loudly you could not hear your own thoughts. You remember the way your children learned to sit in silence, carving wood or mending cloth, understanding without being told that every ounce of energy had to be preserved. You realize that the resilience you have built is not a loud or boastful thing. It is a quiet, steady internal flame that refuses to be extinguished. This legacy of the frontier night is one of profound interdependence. In the modern world, we often think of the pioneer as a solitary figure, a lone ranger carved out of granite, standing against the elements. But as you look at your spouse and your children emerging into the sunlight, their faces pale and their bodies leaner than they were in the fall, you know the truth. You survived because you were a unit. You survived because when one person's spirit wavered, another person was there to stoke the fire. You survived because of the shared body heat under those quilts and the shared rations of salt pork and cornmeal. The frontier night taught you that no one survives alone. This sense of communal resilience became the bedrock of the settlements that would eventually grow into towns and cities. The people who survived these winters were not just individuals. They were the architects of a new kind of society, one built on the knowledge that we are only as strong as the person sitting across the hearth from us. As the weeks pass and the mud begins to dry into workable soil, the memory of the coldest nights begins to fade, but the lessons remain. You find that you move with more purpose now. You do not waste wood. You do not take a sunset for granted. You have a deeper understanding of the rhythms of the earth, an intimacy with the seasons that can only be earned through hardship. When you look toward the horizon, where other families are also emerging from their smoke-stained cabins, you feel a kinship that transcends words. You have all shared the same darkness. You have all felt the same fear when the woodpile ran low and the temperature plummeted below zero. That shared experience creates a bond that is stronger than blood. It is the bond of the survivor. The history of the frontier is often told through the lens of great migrations, battles, and political treaties. But the true history, the one that shaped the American character, happened in the small, dark spaces of the winter cabin. It was forged in the moments when a mother stayed awake all night to keep the fire going while her children slept. It was written in the calluses on a father's hands as he chopped wood in a blizzard until his fingers turned blue. It was etched into the minds of children who watched their parents face the most brutal elements of nature with a grim, unwavering determination. This is the hard-won legacy of the frontier night, the realization that the human spirit is remarkably durable. You realize that this endurance has been passed down to you like a family heirloom. It is a legacy of ingenuity, where you learn to make something from nothing, to find heat in a handful of straw or a few blocks of sod. It is a legacy of patience, where you learn to wait out the storm because you knew that even the longest night eventually gives way to the dawn. Most importantly, it is a legacy of hope. To settle the frontier, you had to believe in a future that you could not yet see. You had to plant seeds in the spring, knowing that a frost might kill them. You had to build a house in the summer, knowing that the winter would try to tear it down. As the sun sets on this spring evening, you sit on a stump in the yard, watching the light turn the distant mountains to a shade of bruised purple. The air is cooling again, as it always does, but the dread is gone. You know how to handle the cold now. You have been through the fire and the ice, and you have come out the other side. You look at your hands, rough and scarred, and you realize they are the hands of someone who has stared down the worst the world could throw at them and did not blink. The story of the frontier families is not just a story of the past. It is a story that continues to resonate because it speaks to a fundamental human truth. We are capable of enduring far more than we imagine. We possess a reservoir of strength that only reveals itself when the lights go out and the temperature drops. As you walk back into your cabin to light a small, cheerful fire for the evening meal, you take one last look at the stars. They are bright and cold, much as they were on those desperate nights in January. But now they look less like distant, frozen eyes and more like beacons. They remind you that while the winter is inevitable, so is the thaw. And the person who emerges from that winter is never the same person who entered it. You are stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected to the world around you. You are a survivor of the frontier night, and that is a legacy that will endure for generations to come. The cabin is warm, the door is latched, and for the first time in a long time, you sleep with the peace of someone who knows exactly what they are made of. Your story, and the story of every family that shivered through the long dark, is written into the very soil of this land, a testament to the resilience that defines the human experience. The thaw has come, the world is reborn, and you are ready for whatever the new season brings.